Hey everybody, it is Scott Schnaars. I am here with Edan Gottlieb for another episode of Lunch Money with Scott and Edan, and really excited about this one because this is actually our 10th episode. We've been consistently putting this out now for 10 weeks in a row.
Woohoo.
And yeah, exactly. Let's celebrate that. And the topic we want to talk about today is actually one where there might be a little bit of a difference in opinions between Adon and I. We want to talk about how do you build a sales organization? And there's really two ways to think about it. The first way is to think about it as a VC funded organization where you've got a bunch of money and you can spend and grow using that. And the other way to think about it is almost a bootstrap model where you're being very cautious about how you spend the money. And there's pros and cons to each of those. So we want to talk about that from the lens of, what does it look like for your financials? And we've got some modeling that we can share with everybody. What does it look like for your people? And how do you ensure that you're building out a great sales culture? And then finally, what does it look like for market share? And how do you make sure that you're growing fast enough to capture a market, especially if you're in a competitive space? So Adon, always great to see you and welcome again. And I know this is something that's near and dear to your heart, and you and I have had multiple arguments about this over the half a dozen or so years that we've known one another. Like, let's get into this again, because I think like there's some really interesting things that you can do when you have a lot of money, and there's some really fun things that you can do when you don't have as much money. So take it away.
Well, it kind of reminds me like every annual planning that we do at the beginning of the year, we have this sparing competition about what's the model. Usually, just for everybody to know, the stance I take is more about create a lean, mean team that is super performing. And Scott's view is like, well, we have money, we should use it wisely. If you don't use it, kind of lose it in emotions. And it starts with financials. Always the conversation starts with financials. And I kind of always do a back of the envelope kind of calculation about, okay, how do you really fine tune your team? And just to make it easy, I take the model of just to have some numbers versus one or two. Like if you take a 10-person team, and you say, I got 10 sales reps and I'm kind of trying to make the number. I got a 700K kind of quota for each of them. I'll kind of play a standard distribution between them. It's like, a couple are going to suck, a couple are going to be super great. The others are going to be somewhere hanging out in the middle over average thing. What would that look like in terms of like my investments and my return? And you end up with something along the line of, it's going to cost me something around $2 million because by the way, I took like 125 base, 125 variable just for the math. And so the actual will be about $2.2 million that I'm going to pay. I'm going to end up with about $4.3 million kind of in revenue. And the question, the challenge, I always say, okay, so what if I do it with 6? Can I get the same amount of money with 6? And you end up, when you look at the math and you say 6 all performing versus the 10 kind of distribution, and you end up with about the same number. You end up with 4.1, 4.2-ish. Costs you slightly more because you pay more accelerators. But, we're talking about instead of costing you like 2 million, it's going to cost you 2.2 or something like that. And so always gravitated towards, okay, let's make a smaller, meaner team. I can make the same number, might be costing me a little bit more, but I just generated or created a team of very high-performing individuals that I could build on and trust because they're all performing. I don't have the crappy ones.
So when you think about this, if you're in an organization, do you as the sales leader make that decision, or do you think that comes down from the CEO?
So I'll refer us back to one of our previous episodes that we talked about comp plans and structuring how you go to market and your plan. You have to be aligned with what the company wants. And this is where it's important. What is important? Now, you're going to get from your CEO and from the board or from whoever's sitting the direction. Yes, we want that, let's spend less money and get more revenue. But there's really what is more important. And you have to push towards, okay, if you have to pick between I'll give you $4 million or $5 million and it's going to be profitable, or I'll give you $8 million and it's not profitable. Which one would you like better? So you got to push to really understand what is the true priority that they have. And sometimes they can't tell you because they themselves have it all mixed up. But only then you'll know what to pick.
So your model of 10 being, I think you said 2.5 million down to 6, which is going to cost you 2.2 and generate basically about the same revenue. The opposite of that reminds me of a hypothetical conversation that you and I've had a bunch of times, and that is if you had unlimited money and you had to make the number, like what would be the optimal number of people that you need to hire? And I think like when you and I were doing the math to prepare for this, we looked at a 20-person model. Which probably is going to cost about twice as much as the 10-person model, and even twice as much as the 6-person model, but it's going to give you 2.5 times the revenue. and your cost of sale becomes better. So the argument that I would make as somebody that's really leaning in on growth is, if you have the finances to be able to support the 20 people, spend the $5 million, hire the 20 people, and get that 9 million back versus the four you were talking about there. And I think like that. I think again, it kind of comes back to like, does growth beat everything? And to your point, would you rather have a small but profitable sales organization with 5 or 6 people, which don't get me wrong, that sounds ideal, or a massive organization that's growing but maybe not profitable? And again, I think that comes back down to the founder or the founding team or the CEO to make that ultimate decision.
But you just hit the crux of the argument, right? Because from a financial standpoint, you look at it and say, here, different configurations I could play with, but basically I spend, 2 million, get 4 in return. Good return, looks good. But if I double it, and to your model that you usually vouch for, it means 10 of them are not going to do anything, right, out of the 20 reps. 5 will do, kind of well, and the rest will give me something, but not something great or to write home about. But at the end, I'm at 9 in revenue for the same year, and probably, increased my spend by about 50%. And so that's the conundrum between which one do I choose?
Right, and this goes back to the discussion that you and I have had 100, it feels like a million times, and that is like ultimately, like as a sales leader, like our job is to make the number, and our job is to whether that costs you 5 million or 10 million or 100 million or 2 million, like if you're getting to the number, and kind of going back to the SKO conversation or the comp plan conversation. If you're getting to the number, with the variables that you were given, that's a winner. And if they say go spend a lot of money to guarantee that you're going to hit the number, I feel like that's a better way to go than I'm going to roll the dice and have my 5 or 6 people who are good but profitable. If one of them gets hit by a bus, I'm almost dead in the water at that point.
Yeah, and it's part of the balance and the risk. One of the questions we talked about, how do you know it? That I like to pose the executive team, CEO, CFO, board, whoever is mandating or looking for the number, is that if we're now in November 15th, at the end of the year, and I will tell you that I could make a stretch and get you double the revenue than you plan, and get you an 8 or a 9 instead of a 4 or 4.5, would you spend, and you're going to have to give me $1 million for it. So I'm going to give you $4 million for $1 million. Would you spend that $1 million at that point in time? And if they say yeah, then you say, okay, so it's very obvious what you want to do.
Yeah, it's a great point.
And so that's one of the ways to try and flush out. It's not easy to flush out. They will try to kind of dance around it. But to that point of discussion, you get to this point of like, okay, so which one do I choose? I think this is where you start introducing the other layers that would help determine for you which path you pick, right? And that if you start looking at that, there's the people aspect, right? Because we talked about the model, what happens in each of them, and it's a very different experience. So the lean and mean team, and I enjoyed and adopted the philosophy. I like to invest in the people and make them successful. I like these high performance and teams and standard of performance and just driving everybody to be great. That's the model. While the model that you advocated for about, hey, just get 20 and 10 will go to waste. That means 10 will go to waste. Another 4 will kind of be dragging along, but won't be really great. And so you really burn through a lot of people. You get better numbers, better results, but you just burn through 60% or 70% of that sales force that's going to go away.
Yeah. And that's something that I saw when I had that model, and I had unlimited pocketbooked and had 40 AEs. Like you identify your half a dozen or so that are really good, that are going to be there tried and true, but you get a lot of them that aren't going to do anything. They're going to come in at 30, 40, 50%, and you're going to move them out. The upside to that model, though, is it does create good career development. One of the challenges that I had at Cloudinary, where you and I worked together, was I had 5 or 6 really good people who were constantly making the number, profitable team, all good, but those people weren't going anywhere. Those people were, they were making a lot of money, they were closing deals, the company respected them, they weren't moving anywhere. So when I had SDRs come to me and say, hey, I want to be on the sales team, I really didn't have any place to stick them. Whereas, when you have a lot of people, you can give your SDRs, BDRs, whatever you call them, you can give them this new career opportunity where they can choose to grow and move forward in their careers. And sometimes they're going to work out and sometimes they're not. But when you're churning through people quickly in a high volume high spend model, you do create this culture of, yeah, it's churn and burn, but on the flip side, like I like to think about it as you say, like I like to think about it as giving them an opportunity, and this opportunity pops up that they historically didn't have.
Yeah, and it's going back to the choice of like how you like and build a team, and also it goes back the company what it's trying to achieve, what's kind of the acceptable wanted culture, and so that's kind of the plus and minuses on that model.
Yeah.
I think there's a third leg of the stool to figure out exactly which model to pick, the good one, which is mine or yours. It's and that's the
Neither is good. They're
no,
just different.
I know. They're
They're just
different,
different.
and the context is important. But there's a third dimension here, which is, you talked about how well and how fast you can grow, and we talked about even the financials. It's probably you can end up with more than double the revenue, like a 2.5x on the revenue, by going from a 6 to a 20 kind of, and same kind of configuration. It does give you also traction in the market, right? And the more revenue you do, you got to take into account what happens in the market. And most markets today are very competitive. And probably I argue if your market is no competition at all, either, it's not quite a mature market yet, or maybe it's a dead one. Because I think there's the old business saying, well, there's competition, there's a market.
Yeah.
And so if you go slower, they have to take into account the fact of how well you capture your market share and how much and how strong your competitors are coming into. And I think one of the strong arguments that you had on your side when we were chatting about this, at the end of the day, growth and revenue will have a bigger weight on your evaluation and in your company than profitability will have.
In most companies, yeah.
Yeah. But the point, I think that it forces in the model of lean and mean small teams, it forces you on really being focused and really picking your focused niche and your focused markets and executing really, really well on them. It's not counter to you being able to capture market share. It's just you have to pick which markets and what segment you're going to take the share and focus on them, because you have a small team that could do this very, very targeted and very focused type of a mission. And you have to pick that, and through that you start capturing your market share and growing through it. And that's kind of your emotions into how do you capture market share. But you got to look at the market as part of that decision. And one of the important things on the model, if you pick the small one, you make sure you have that well-established focus and niche or segment or whichever you pick it, and you execute well on that one to take a number one, number two position in it.
Well, I think like if you are and this gets into like a different, maybe slightly different discussion, but if you're a founder and you think I want to go down a sales-led growth path, then you want to invest more heavily into sales. If you are product-led growth, like then you can invest more heavily in product, and you can have that smaller lean and mean sales organization and still capture a lot of that competitive market share, even if you're doing it on a self-serve basis, and then having your sellers go in and try to drive that kind of that advance that market share into bigger deals.
Yeah.
So
So market share is important.
Or if that was a
No,
just a statement there.
I think it relates to this. How do I capture market share? And the
Yeah.
big difference between the two models says one is I have to be very narrow focused and kind of hope that I will make the right choice on the right segment, because if I make the mistake, I'm dead, or I'm walking dead because I'm profitable, so I can stay alive. Or the other one is I need to make a brute force in the market and take position, because otherwise I'll be kicked out. And that's kind of the third dimension that comes into the overall, how do I choose which one? So it's like, one is kind of the financials. So do I want more money, and significantly more? I mean, from the hypothetical, you took it to the real. It's like 20 people. It's not like hypothetical. It's like 20 people.
Yeah.
I'll spend 1.5 more money and get 2.5 revenue. By the way, the numbers there, cost of sales, actually look better than the ones on the smaller models.
Right. But in that model, like you really have to be 100% certain you've got good product market fit, because if you just come in and you're like, hey, we don't really have product market fit, but we want to hire 20 people and spend $5 million on that, you're not going to get 9 million in revenue. You're going to get $1 million in revenue, and you've wasted 5 million in cost.
Yep. And you're right. We didn't include those, but I think in every one of the motions in sales in today's market, product is a mandatory thing. a good product market fit, you must have. It used to be a discussion and a fight over like, is it product led growth and sales led growth? And we'll have probably a whole episode about this one. But in reality, great product that could run and you could trust it. And by the way, to some extent, product led growth is a proof that your product is great rather than just a revenue mechanism. Is must. Without it, you won't be able to build any of the models. Not the small team, not the large team, all of them will fail. But more so, you're right about your model. If it's not, your model is going to collapse. If you have a good one, your model can run and deliver that 2.5 results than the other models. Yeah,
cool.
So to summarize it, you got to look at the financials of it. More money, costing you slightly more, but you get more of it. Do you want to do that? There's the people. What's your philosophy? It's like small, mean, or do you give the opportunity and create this kind of a cycle?
Yeah, I mean, and that's cutthroat culture versus like good people culture, and neither is right or wrong. It just depends on what you want to build there.
Yeah, and there's some companies, by the way, who were very successful doing it and didn't have like a mean culture in them. There's some companies that do have mean culture. It usually, creates it, but there are companies that succeeded this way. And then you got to look at how fast you need to capture your market share and how much you want to take that risk of I'm making a small gamble versus I'm taking it all in. And then it's all based on solid product market fit. Otherwise, the whole thing doesn't work.
That's exactly it. Well, I think with that, we're at time. And Edan, always good to chat with you again. Appreciate the time. And this has been the 10th milestone episode of Lunch Money with Scott and Edan. So thanks very much for tuning in.
Thanks.